probably since the beginning of 2000 all the way up to now. One of the ways that we have found very helpful, those of us who do it, and I think most of you are acquainted with this, some more than others, one of the ways we found helpful to understand the context in which things are happening, to try and get a new angle on how to move forward with our decision making and the way we think about ourselves, because we really do need a new way of thinking to move forward and adapt to some of these changes. The kinds of thinking that basically created the institutions that are now being turned on their heads, the standard form of economic assumption, the standard form of political assumption, the standard form of organizational, even corporate assumption, and certainly of governmental assumption. All those things are being heavily challenged, uprooted, turned over, exposed for dark underbellies, some violently, some more in a positive sense, but being turned over is what's going on. So I just want to comment on a couple of the archetypes that are at work right now for all of us, to give us an extra angle, an extra tool to look into ourselves to see what kinds of decisions we can make about our lives that will move us ahead individually, but also represent something that's beneficial for society at large. Because we are all concerned, I know, about the world and what it seems to have come to for us right now. Archetypes, of course, have been interpreted many different ways by different people. Generally, we want to think of them as like a universal kind of force that affects, impels, and structures and permeates consciousness, that both the human psyche and human behavior and our consciousness at large of what's kind of going on in the world around us. Freud called them primordial instincts, and Plato referred to them as universal principles of the cosmos that even went beyond man's own particular psyche. Jung referred to them as basic constituents of the psyche that was shared culturally by all human beings around the world. He called it the collective unconscious and described it that way. And of course, James Hillman, probably the guy who's pretty much responsible for transformative psychology, has referred to them as gods of the psyche. And there's an astrological aspect to the archetypes, because there is a group of principles that governs the qualitative dynamics at the time anything that is born or created. Jung had made the comment that, let's see where I've got my notes here. Out of order story of my life this morning. Mercury. At any rate, Jung drew the analogy of being born into a certain time is like the birth of a wine, a vintage. There's a certain quality to the season. There's a certain quality to the dynamic in which it was formed, and that quality continues on through the life of that vintage. So we have the time of our births. There were a certain set of dynamics at large that were informing the collective consciousness, and so informing our particular psyche also. Not to suggest that this means that any person is fated by what took place at the time of their birth to play out any particular kind of life or particular kind of set of consequences, but rather the fact that, but more that there's an actual level of freedom to be gained from understanding and being aware, as opposed to unaware, of the context into which we find ourselves created, or in the context in which we create something. Give birth to a project, give birth to an idea or a movement. We'll be able to see a little later this weekend, we'll be able to take a look at some of the archetypes that were at play when we created this event this weekend, which should be very interesting for everyone. But the archetypes, the principles governing the qualitative dynamics of time, and anything was born or created at that certain time, embodies those archetypal dynamics and perpetuates them throughout its lifetime. There are correspondences, synchronicities with the planets and their position and their relationship to each other that have been proven now over centuries and centuries, and especially in the last several decades. to be very helpful in understanding what's going on with us in our lives with each other and in our life outside in general. James Hillman, in writing about the archetypes in his book Revisioning Psychology, says, "And let us imagine archetypes as the deepest patterns of psychic functioning, the roots of the soil governing the perspectives we have of ourselves and the world. Self-evident images to which psychic life and our theories about it ever return. And there are many metaphors for describing the archetypes: potentials of structure, invisible crystals in solution of forms in plants, something that suddenly shows forth under certain circumstances or conditions, patterns of intellectual behavior, the recurring typicalities in history, the basic syndromes in psychiatry, paradigmatic thought models in science, the worldwide figures, rituals, and relationships in anthropology." But one thing he says is absolutely essential to the notion of archetypes: their emotional possessive effect, their bedazzlement of consciousness. By setting up a universe which tends to hold everything as we do, see, and say in the sway of its cosmos, an archetype is in its own way comparable to a god. And gods, religions sometimes say, are less accessible to the senses and to the intellect than they are to the imaginative vision and emotion of the soul. We want to try and see if we can find ways this weekend, and I don't want this to sound too intellectual, but to see if we can open our soul receptors to the energies that are moving through us now and shaping the kind of life that we want to be aware of their effect, so that we can better be open to new and creative ways to live with it. Ann Bowman will go into this more. I just wanted to say a couple of general things about a couple of the archetypal principles that are at play now in the planets and where they are in everybody's, in humanity's chart right now, and in the world in general. One archetype principle we want to talk about is Uranus. Uranus is a planet astrologers know as a planet, sometimes we're connected with the god Prometheus, which corresponds, when its effects are being felt, those effects, those permutations of the psyche or of situations, comes in the form of rapid change, freedom, impulses to rebellion, revolution, creativity, innovation, stirring things up, sometimes crisis. Prometheus was the god that stole the fire from the gods and gave it to humans so that the human beings would have greater freedom. So the impetus of the Uranian archetype, when it's having its effect, is that we have creativity as opposed to eccentricity, which is kind of its dark side. We have innovation, but if it goes to its dark side, it could be lawlessness. So there's upsides to these things and there are dark sides to these forces. We're trying to understand how to creatively use them to our benefit and not to our detriment by getting caught up in the wrong interpretation of them. But Uranus is somehow upsetting and disruptive and always attempting to force change in a situation. Sometimes for good, sometimes, well, right now Uranus is passing through the sign of Aries. Aries, as we know, is a fire sign, a sign that has its own strength toward change, its own drive to create something new, its own drive to assort itself. So you've got the change maker, rebellion maker, trickster Uranus in a sign that's already fired up and looking for ways to change the current situation. It's a very potent time for Uranus right now. So when you look at it in your chart, you might make note of that. The other archetype that's significant right now that we want to talk about, there are many, but the ones that are very significant right now, the other one is Pluto. Pluto, associated mythologically with the god of the underworld, is a deeply, profoundly transformative kind of energy. When the archetype is having its effect, when it is permeating the consciousness, there's a kind of a deep uprooting that tries to take place. It's been called the sign of death and regeneration, which is, of course, is the ultimate uprooting, so that something new can be created. It impels evolution and transformation. Pluto's been called the great transformer when the archetype is at work. Compels, empowers, can even overwhelm, and can completely destroy, as we said. Pluto is powerful stuff. It moves very slowly. It stays in a particular aspect of the zodiac, in a particular sign for a long time. And it's not so much that it sparks big things all the time, but rather it's always building underneath, undoing, digging up slowly. And when the transformations take place, they're very noticeable. And they will eventually take place. Pluto is a very powerful archetype in the collective unconscious. Again, connected to the underworld, the deep psychic forces, the fiery depths, the core of the earth, of the volcanoes, and that can release with destructive effect or transformative effect, depending on how it's understood and worked with. Very deep instincts. Can be a violent discharge of pent-up energy. So it can be similar to a therapeutic release by releasing pent-up energy in terms of a psychic breakthrough. Right now, these two archetypes are in the last third or so of approximately a 12-year cycle where they come into aspect. Uranus is squaring Pluto right now, and a square, as you know from your astrology, is a dynamic tension between the two archetypes. So you have the always powerful, sometimes dangerous dynamic of Uranus and Aries, using its stirring up energy, sparking rebellion, change, disturbing the status quo. You have it in a dynamic tension with Pluto, which is digging up underneath things and transforming them, getting at the heart of things, exposing things, turning things inside out. And then we have the fact that Pluto is also in a particular sign of the zodiac. It's in the sign of Capricorn right now, and will be for another 7-ish years. It's been, I think it entered into orb, what they call the orb, which is a relationship of being in the sign as opposed to in another sign, in the Capricorn sign around 2008. If we look at some of the things that have been going on during the context of these dynamics, we can see how they're definitely being played out. 2008, of course, had the eruption and overturning and upset of a lot of current economic assumptions that everybody had been operating on. We had the recession, thousands of people, billions of people lost assets, lost their homes. The banking industry was turned upside down. Capricorn rules things like economy, corporations, banking, big business. These are all Capricornian areas of life. Government policies and influences, politics and political activities, societal laws, rules, regulations, churches and organized religion, and the dogmas and rituals they adhere to, and the patriarchal system in general. You go down that list and think about the last 8 years or so, and everything has been in a constant uproar. There are places where there have been radical changes and transformations, and we can sit here and talk about current events since 2008. We'll just come out example after example after example. Right now we have the complete upsurge in our political system, which we sort of had taken for granted for a very long time, now being completely upended. No likelihood that it'll ever be the same again. We haven't quite figured out yet whether we're intelligent enough to have that be a good thing or a completely disastrous thing for our future. But it's work in progress. And we talk about these situations going on, we want to think about and reflect on the personal side of this same kind of issue. Where is Capricorn in my chart? What maybe is being dug up or trying to be dug up and exposed? Is it time for something to come out for me that has been deeper than I've been able to grasp or wanted to grasp before? Many systems and entities will go through, and have gone through, and will continue to go through, Plutonic-like transformations. The ones that resist will probably break down altogether. These are some comments by astrologer Elizabeth Jones, writing a few years back about what had taken place with Pluto moving through Capricorn. How will Pluto and Capricorn affect you? Isabel Hickey writes that only by bringing the light exactly to where we're standing in life can we transform and thus evolve beyond. Pluto is the death of the separate self, she writes. Some of the areas where an individual could feel the effect of this archetype in Capricorn, digging up, transforming, exposing, revealing, and improving, hopefully. Work and career, your position or standing in the world and your reputation, how you're recognized, acknowledged, or seen by others, rewards, consequences from your past efforts, actions, or decisions, karmic issues may be coming back to revisit, your morals, ethics, and standards, and beliefs, what you identify as the basic structure and format of your life, that which you rely and depend upon, providing you with a sense of security, that which gives you purpose and direction. Any or all of these areas in your life could be going through effects from the Pluto transit. Do not think that this is all bad. Pluto can set things right which you have been struggling with for a long time. It's an energy that can be used to get to a new level or a new answer to questions that have been in the back of your mind about what does my life need to be at this point in time. Well, Elizabeth suggests these questions for people to think about during Pluto moving through Capricorn in their chart. I can resonate with almost every one of these. What strengths do you have that you are not using? What are your genuine intentions in a given situation? Do you have resources you have available to you and are not using? What would revitalize you at a deep level? And one I think about a lot, what would you do if you were unafraid? Some of the keys Elizabeth suggests to working with the new energy in Pluto, that this kind of transformative push that's going on for all of us right now in one way or another. Stay open to new feelings or experience. While they may be uncomfortable or unusual, they can reveal to you what you've kept as a holding pattern in some areas of your life. Allow the death of those things that are ready to fall away. I had a Tai Chi teacher that used to talk about the concept of investing in loss as a new economic model for your personal activities going forward. Invest in loss. That which is true of you can't be lost. All you can lose is that which is not true of you. So allow the death of those things that are ready to fall away, and this will open doors. It could include habits, addictions, or whatever keeps you from feeling vital and alive. Move in directions of greater simplicity and away from complexity as much as possible. Interesting suggestion. Practice developing a strong faith in the benevolence of the universe. This is happening for me, not to me, is a great motto right now, she suggests. Release, let go, be willing to change, stretch, evolve, and surround yourself, your loved ones, the planet, your thoughts, and your feelings in light. We may say aloha. That's another objective there. See this as a chance to reinvent yourself, because the world is having to reinvent itself. And here's my last page. And we're in the midst of a very, very potent time. So I'm going to turn this over to Ann, but I just wanted to leave you with this thought. Working with the archetypes, listening to them with your emotional soul, listening to where they want you to go, letting go of ideas of yourself that are no longer relevant, being willing to take a chance, is understanding how to work with this almost dreamlike quality that life can have to it. You're thinking from the level of your soul. Sogyal Rinpoche, writing the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, said that it's good to always recognize the dreamlike qualities of life and reduce your attachment and your aversion. Practice good-heartedness toward all beings. Be loving and compassionate, no matter what others do to you. What they do will not matter so much when you see it as a dream. The trick is how to have positive intention during the dream. This is the essential point. This is true spirituality. And this from Howard Thurman. Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive. Then go do that. Because what the world needs is people who come alive. So let's try and come alive a little more to whatever we're working on for ourselves this weekend. Thank you very much. I just want to say, too, before I step away, that we have a presentation by Ann and Richard coming up. And then Richard and Rick are going to demo the empty chair technique for us before we go to our breakout groups in the afternoon.